The ambassador's son threw the datapad across the ornate reception hall, its metallic clatter echoing off marble walls as it skidded past Captain Lucas Kane's polished boots. The 12-year-old's face burned red with embarrassment and rage, tears threatening to spill from his eyes as diplomatic personnel throughout the chamber pretended not to notice his outburst. "I hate this place," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. "I hate everyone here." Lucas remained perfectly still, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. Protocol dictated non-interference in civilian affairs, especially involving diplomatic families. The Terran embassy operated under strict neutrality guidelines, and royal guards were expected to observe, protect, and maintain silence unless directly threatened. Ambassador Harrison stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely contained frustration. "Mason, pick up that device immediately and apologize to Captain Kane." The boy's shoulders shook as he stared at the scattered datapad components. "They said humans don't belong here. They said we're too primitive for the Galactic Council chambers." Lucas watched the child's distress with professional detachment, though something stirred beneath his disciplined exterior. Mason's rejection from the youth diplomatic program had been discussed in security briefings. The Altarian Council's decision was final, their reasoning clear. Humans lacked the necessary evolutionary development for advanced interspecies cooperation. "The Council's decision stands," Ambassador Harrison said quietly. "We cannot appeal their judgment." Mason's hands clenched into small fists. "But I studied everything. I learned their languages, their customs, their histories. I memorized every treaty and trade agreement from the past 50 years. The ambassador's aide, Patricia Wells, approached cautiously. "Mason, sometimes these institutions have requirements beyond our control." "It's not fair," Mason said, his voice barely audible. "They didn't even test me. They just saw 'human' on my application and said no." Lucas noted the tremor in the boy's voice, the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Security protocols required monitoring civilian emotional states for potential security risks. Extreme distress could lead to unpredictable behavior or exploitation by hostile entities. The ornate doors at the chamber's far end began to open with mechanical precision. Lucas's training kicked in immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his ceremonial sword's hilt. Unscheduled arrivals required immediate assessment and response preparation. Queen Isabella emerged through the entrance, her presence commanding instant attention from every person in the hall. Her royal blue gown swept across the polished floor as she moved with deliberate grace, her expression unreadable but intense. The Queen's unexpected appearance sent ripples of tension through the assembled diplomatic staff. Lucas stepped forward smoothly, executing a perfect formal bow. "Your Majesty, we were not informed of your arrival." The Queen's eyes swept across the scene, taking in the broken datapad, the tearful child, and the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the chamber. Her gaze lingered on Mason for several long seconds before moving to Ambassador Harrison. "Ambassador, I received reports of a disturbance requiring royal attention." Harrison straightened nervously. "Your Majesty, it was merely a minor diplomatic setback involving my son's application to the youth program." Queen Isabella's expression remained neutral, but Lucas detected subtle changes in her posture and breathing patterns. Royal training had taught him to read micro-expressions and body language indicators that revealed true intentions beneath diplomatic facades. "Captain Kane," the Queen said without taking her eyes off Mason, "explain the situation." Lucas felt the weight of protocol pressing against his chest. Royal guards typically avoided involving themselves in civilian disputes, but direct royal commands superseded standard operating procedures. The young man received notification of rejection from the Altarian Youth Diplomatic Corps, Your Majesty. The decision appears to have caused significant emotional distress. The Queen moved closer to Mason, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. "What is your name, child?" Mason wiped his eyes quickly, trying to compose himself under royal scrutiny. "Mason Harrison, Your Majesty? And you wish to serve in diplomatic relations between species?" "Yes, Your Majesty, more than anything." Queen Isabella extended her hand toward the broken datapad. "Show me the rejection notice." Patricia Wells hurried to gather the scattered pieces, her hands shaking slightly as she reassembled the device. The screen flickered back to life, displaying the formal rejection letter with its cold, bureaucratic language. The Queen read silently, her expression growing more thoughtful with each passing moment. Lucas observed her breathing pattern change, noting the slight narrowing of her eyes as she processed the document's contents. "Insufficient evolutionary development," she read aloud. "Primitive cognitive architecture, incompatible with advanced interspecies cooperation protocols." The words hung in the air like accusations, their weight pressing down on everyone present. Mason's shoulders slumped further with each phrase, as though hearing them spoken by the Queen made them more real and final. Queen Isabella handed the datapad back to Patricia, her movements precise and controlled. "Captain Kane, you will escort young Mason Harrison to the royal chambers immediately." Ambassador Harrison stepped forward quickly. "Your Majesty, surely this matter doesn't require such elevated attention." "The matter now requires my personal evaluation," the Queen replied firmly. "The council chambers await." The royal chamber doors sealed with a soft pneumatic hiss as Queen Isabella led Mason through corridors lined with portraits of previous monarchs. Lucas followed 3 steps behind, maintaining proper escort distance while scanning for potential security threats. The palace's automated systems hummed quietly around them, adjusting lighting and temperature in response to royal presence. Mason's footsteps echoed hollowly against polished stone floors, his nervousness evident in his unsteady gait and frequent glances toward the imposing artwork surrounding them. Each portrait seemed to watch their progress with ancient, judging eyes. "Tell me about your studies," Queen Isabella said, without turning around. Mason's voice wavered slightly. "I've been learning about the 17 major species in the Galactic Council, Your Majesty. Their languages, cultural practices, economic systems, and historical conflicts." 17 species? The Queen repeated thoughtfully. "Most adult diplomats struggle to master 5. They passed through a security checkpoint where advanced scanners analyzed their biological signatures and verified their clearance levels." Lucas noted the increased security measures, suggesting they were entering highly classified areas of the royal complex. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, dominated by a holographic display showing real-time galactic political boundaries. Dozens of star systems pulsed with different colors, indicating alliance status, trade relationships, and territorial disputes. The complexity rivaled anything Lucas had seen in military command centers. Queen Isabella gestured toward the display. "Navigate to the Altarian system and explain their current political situation." Mason approached the hologram hesitantly, his hands hovering over the control interface. After a brief pause, he began manipulating the display with surprising confidence, zooming through star clusters and highlighting specific regions. "The Altarians control 14 systems through their council hegemony," he began, his voice gaining strength. "They're currently experiencing internal pressure from 3 colonial worlds demanding greater autonomy. Their economy depends heavily on quantum crystal mining, which has created labor disputes with the Zelnari workers they employ." Lucas watched the boy's transformation as he engaged with the subject matter. Mason's earlier distress had given way to focused intellectual energy, his movements becoming more assured as he explained complex interspecies relationships. "The Altarians rejected human participation in their youth program due to perceived cognitive limitations," Mason continued, highlighting relevant star systems. "However, their own historical records show similar developmental patterns during their pre-industrial period." Queen Isabella moved closer to the display. "Show me those historical patterns." Mason's fingers danced across the control interface, pulling up archived data streams that painted detailed pictures of Altarian social evolution. Charts and graphs filled the air around them, creating a 3-dimensional timeline of species development. "Here," Mason said, pointing to specific data points. "The Altarians required approximately 800 Earth years to develop their current diplomatic sophistication. Humans have achieved similar linguistic and cultural adaptation in less than 2 centuries since first contact." The Queen studied the information intently. "You accessed restricted historical archives?" "I have diplomatic clearance through my father's position," Mason replied quickly. "I've been using it to research every council species, trying to understand why humans are considered inadequate." Lucas noted the subtle shift in Queen Isabella's posture. The way her breathing pattern indicated increased interest rather than disapproval. Royal training included extensive study of human behavioral patterns and micro-expressions. "Captain Kane," the Queen said without turning around, "what is your assessment of this young man's knowledge?" Lucas considered his response carefully. Protocol discouraged personal opinions during official proceedings, but direct royal questions demanded honest evaluation. "The depth of research and analytical capability exceed most military intelligence briefings I've received, Your Majesty." Mason turned toward Lucas with surprise and gratitude, though he quickly returned his attention to the Queen when she began manipulating the holographic display herself. "Show me the Council's criteria for youth program admission," Queen Isabella commanded. New data streams appeared, outlining specific requirements for cognitive development, cultural understanding, and diplomatic potential. Column after column of metrics and evaluations filled the space around them, creating an overwhelming array of standards and expectations. Mason studied the criteria carefully. The requirements focus heavily on species-specific neural development patterns and traditional diplomatic methodologies. They don't account for adaptive learning or cross-cultural synthesis capabilities. Meaning? Humans might not develop the same way as other species, but we develop differently, not deficiently, Mason explained. Our neuroplasticity allows us to understand and communicate across species barriers in ways that might actually be superior to traditional single-species diplomatic training. Queen Isabella deactivated the holographic display, plunging the chamber into softer ambient lighting. The sudden quiet seemed to amplify the weight of Mason's words, creating a moment of profound contemplation. "You believe humans possess unique diplomatic advantages," the Queen said. "I believe diversity of thought and approach strengthens diplomatic outcomes," Mason replied carefully. "The Council's rejection wasn't based on my individual capabilities or knowledge. It was based on predetermined assumptions about human limitations." Lucas observed the Queen's expression, noting subtle indicators of decision-making processes. Royal protocol training included extensive study of monarchy behavioral patterns during critical judgment phases. "Captain Kane, prepare a formal communication channel to the Altarian Council," Queen Isabella ordered. "High priority, immediate response required." Lucas moved to the chamber's communication array, his fingers working efficiently across quantum encryption interfaces. Within moments, the holographic display reactivated, showing communication pathways to the Altarian homeworld. "Your Majesty," Lucas reported. "Secure channel established. Council Coordinator Veltar is available for immediate consultation." The chamber filled with blue-tinged light as the holographic communicator materialized, a 10-foot-tall representation of the Altarian Council leader. Veltar's distinctive crystalline carapace reflected the light in complex patterns, while multiple sensory appendages moved with subtle agitation. "Queen Isabella," Veltar's translated voice resonated through the chamber. "This communication arrives without proper diplomatic scheduling protocols." "Council Coordinator Veltar," the Queen replied formally. "I am contacting you regarding your recent rejection of human participation in the youth diplomatic program." Veltar's sensory appendages shifted in what Lucas recognized as Altarian irritation displays. The decision followed established council guidelines for species developmental assessment. Human cognitive architecture lacks necessary sophistication for advanced diplomatic education. Mason stepped forward before anyone could stop him. "Council Coordinator, may I respectfully request clarification on your assessment methodology?" The massive hologram focused on the boy, its multiple visual sensors adjusting to examine him more closely. "You are the rejected applicant." "Yes, sir. I'd like to understand the specific cognitive deficiencies that led to my rejection." Lucas tensed, ready to intervene if the situation escalated beyond diplomatic norms. Queen Isabella raised a subtle hand gesture, signaling him to remain in position but stay alert. Veltar's carapace shifted through several color patterns before responding. Human neural development patterns indicate limited capacity for multidimensional thinking required in advanced interspecies cooperation. "Can you define multidimensional thinking as applied to diplomatic scenarios?" Mason asked. The Altarian coordinator paused, apparently surprised by the question's directness. "Multidimensional thinking requires simultaneous processing of cultural, economic, territorial, and temporal factors while maintaining awareness of species-specific psychological and physiological needs." Mason nodded thoughtfully. Like analyzing the current Zelnari labor dispute in your mining colonies while considering its impact on your council's internal autonomy debates and its potential effects on trade relationships with the Viridian Empire? Veltar's visual sensors focused more intently on Mason. You are familiar with current council internal affairs. I've been studying Altarian political dynamics for 3 years, Mason replied calmly. The Zelnari workers are demanding representation in colonial governance decisions, which challenges traditional Altarian hierarchical structures. Simultaneously, 3 colonial worlds are using the labor disputes to justify their autonomy requests. Queen Isabella watched the exchange silently, her expression unreadable but alert. Lucas noted her breathing pattern indicated heightened attention and controlled anticipation. Furthermore, Mason continued, the Viridian Empire has been quietly negotiating alternative quantum crystal supply agreements with independent mining consortiums, potentially undermining Altarian economic leverage if the labor disputes continue without resolution. Your information appears accurate. My solution would involve granting limited Zelnari representation in colonial administrative councils while maintaining Altarian oversight of resource extraction operations, Mason said. This would address worker concerns without compromising council authority, while simultaneously reducing colonial world's justifications for autonomy by demonstrating council responsiveness to legitimate governance issues. Lucas observed Veltar's color patterns shifting through what his training identified as deep consideration. Such a solution would also stabilize quantum crystal production schedules, ensuring continued Viridian Empire partnership while potentially attracting other major purchasers impressed by Altarian diplomatic innovation. Mason added. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle humming of quantum communication equipment. Veltar's sensory appendages moved in complex patterns that suggested intense internal deliberation. Queen Isabella finally spoke. Council Coordinator, does this analysis demonstrate the multidimensional thinking you consider necessary for diplomatic education? Veltar's massive form shifted, his carapace displaying colors Lucas had never seen before in Altarian communications. The analysis demonstrates sophisticated understanding of interconnected political dynamics. Then why was this young man rejected from your program? The Queen asked. Council guidelines specify species-based developmental criteria rather than individual assessment protocols, Veltar admitted. Human applications undergo automatic rejection based on predetermined cognitive limitations. Mason stepped closer to the hologram. Sir, with respect, wouldn't individual assessment provide more accurate evaluation of candidates regardless of species? The Altarian coordinator's appendages stilled completely, a sign Lucas recognized as profound consideration or internal conflict. Individual assessment would require significant revision of established council educational protocols. Would such revision benefit the council's diplomatic effectiveness? Queen Isabella asked. Veltar's color pattern cycled through several sequences before stabilizing on deep blue tones. Enhanced diversity of perspective and analytical approach would likely improve council diplomatic outcomes. The Queen moved closer to the communication array. Then I formally request reconsideration of Mason Harrison's application based on individual merit rather than species classification. Such reconsideration would establish precedent for future human applications, Veltar warned. Perhaps that precedent would benefit all species involved, the Queen replied firmly. The hologram flickered as Veltar consulted with advisors beyond the communication range. Minutes passed in tense silence before the council coordinator returned his attention to the chamber. Queen Isabella, the council will conduct individual assessment of Mason Harrison's diplomatic capabilities within 7 standard days. If his performance meets council standards, admission will be granted and current species-based restrictions will be reviewed. Mason's eyes widened with shock and hope, though he maintained composure under royal and diplomatic scrutiny. Lucas noted the boy's trembling hands and elevated heart rate through subtle physiological indicators. Thank you, Council Coordinator, Queen Isabella said formally. We look forward to your assessment. The holographic communication terminated, leaving the chamber in relative darkness as emergency lighting systems activated. Queen Isabella turned to face Mason directly, her expression serious but not unkind. Young man, you now have an opportunity that no human has ever received. she said quietly. Your performance will determine not only your own future, but potentially the future of human participation in galactic diplomacy. Mason's voice came out as barely a whisper. Your Majesty, I understand the responsibility. Captain Kane will oversee your preparation for the assessment, the Queen continued. You will have access to royal diplomatic archives in consultation with our most experienced interspecies negotiators. Lucas stepped forward. Your Majesty, such preparation falls outside standard royal guard duties. Queen Isabella's gaze sharpened. Captain, this matter now carries implications for human dignity and future galactic standing. Your military and diplomatic training make you uniquely qualified to guide this young man's preparation. The weight of royal commands settled over Lucas like armor. Protocol demanded absolute compliance with royal directives, though this assignment stretched far beyond his usual responsibilities. Yes, Your Majesty. I will ensure proper preparation. Mason turned to Lucas with a mixture of gratitude and terror. Captain, I won't disappoint you or the Queen. Disappointment is not the concern, Lucas replied. Proper preparation and focused effort will determine the outcome. Queen Isabella moved toward the chamber's exit, her footsteps echoing with finality. Mason Harrison, you have 7 days to prove that human potential exceeds galactic prejudice. Captain Kane will ensure you're ready. The chamber doors sealed behind the Queen, leaving Lucas alone with a 12-year-old boy whose success or failure might reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. The responsibility felt heavier than any battlefield command he'd ever carried. Captain, Mason said softly, where do we begin? Lucas looked at the young man's determined expression and made his decision. We begin with understanding that 7 days will feel like 7 years, and 7 years of preparation must be compressed into 7 days. I'm ready. No, you're not, Lucas replied honestly, but you will be. The Royal Archive stretched endlessly through crystalline corridors lined with data storage systems containing thousands of years of diplomatic history. Lucas led Mason through security checkpoints that recognized his royal authorization, granting them access to classified materials normally restricted to senior diplomatic personnel. Your assessment will cover 5 primary areas, Lucas explained as they walked. Cultural adaptation, economic analysis, conflict resolution, protocol mastery, and strategic planning. The Altarians will test each area through practical scenarios. Mason's footsteps echoed nervously behind him. What kind of scenarios? Live negotiations with actual council members, economic crisis simulations, cultural violation responses, and emergency diplomatic situations. Lucas paused at a massive database interface. Any single failure will result in immediate dismissal. The archive's central chamber materialized around them as automated systems responded to their presence. Holographic displays activated throughout the space, creating an immersive environment filled with diplomatic records, treaty documents, and negotiation transcripts. Begin with Altarian cultural fundamentals, Lucas commanded. You must understand not just what they think, but how they think. Mason approached the nearest interface, his hands moving across control surfaces with growing confidence. Their society operates through consensus hierarchy, where individual status derives from collective contribution rather than personal achievement. Correct, but insufficient. Understand the emotional context behind that structure. New displays materialized showing Altarian historical records, cultural ceremonies, and social interaction patterns. Mason studied them intently, his analysis becoming more sophisticated with each revelation. They experienced a devastating civil war 3,000 years ago caused by individual power accumulation, Mason said slowly. Their entire cultural evolution since then has focused on preventing similar conflicts through collective decision-making. How does this knowledge affect diplomatic approach? Individual achievements or proposals must be presented as contributions to collective benefit, Mason replied. Direct personal negotiation would be considered culturally offensive and potentially threatening. They worked through the day and into the night, Lucas pushing Mason through increasingly complex scenarios while monitoring his comprehension and retention rates. The boy's intellectual capacity impressed him, but intellectual knowledge alone wouldn't survive practical assessment pressure. Tomorrow we begin live practice sessions, Lucas announced as they left the archives. Sleep well. Your real education starts at dawn. Mason's training intensified with each passing day as Lucas subjected him to scenarios that would challenge experienced diplomats. Mock negotiations, crisis simulations, and cultural interaction exercises pushed the boy beyond his previous limitations, while revealing capabilities Lucas hadn't expected. The Viridian Empire representative is insulting Altarian honor through seemingly polite language, Lucas said during one practice session. How do you respond without escalating conflict? Mason considered carefully. Acknowledge the implied criticism while redirecting focus towards shared objectives. Ambassador Valnox raises important concerns about implementation methodology. Perhaps we could explore approaches that honor both Altarian wisdom and Viridian efficiency. Better, Lucas said, but watch your timing. Altarians require 3 seconds of silence between major statements for proper consideration. Hour after hour, they refined Mason's diplomatic technique until his responses became instinctive rather than analytical. Lucas pushed harder as the deadline approached, knowing that mechanical preparation wouldn't survive the pressure of actual assessment. On the final day, Queen Isabella returned to observe Mason's progress. Lucas watched her evaluate the boy's performance during a complex 3-way negotiation simulation involving territorial disputes and trade agreements. Mason navigated the scenario with growing confidence, finding solutions that respected all parties' core interests while maintaining diplomatic protocol. His earlier nervousness had transformed into focused competence. Impressive improvement, the Queen observed quietly. Is he ready? Lucas considered his assessment carefully. He's as ready as 7 days allows, Your Majesty. The Altarian assessment chamber materialized around Mason as quantum transportation technology delivered him directly to the Council's educational facility. Lucas and Queen Isabella watched through real-time holographic feeds as 5 council members took their positions around the examination space. Council Coordinator Veltar's massive form dominated the center of the chamber. Mason Harrison, you will face 5 assessment challenges. Success requires completion of all 5 without significant error. Mason stood straight, his royal diplomatic training evident in his posture and breathing control. I understand, Council Coordinator. The first challenge began immediately as the chamber transformed into economic crisis simulation. Mason found himself representing Earth's interests during a galactic trade collapse, forced to negotiate resource-sharing agreements while maintaining humanity's dignity, and a choosing sense of Lucas watched the boy apply lessons learned during their preparation, finding creative solutions that addressed multiple species' needs simultaneously. Mason's youth became an advantage, allowing him to approach problems without the preconceptions that limited more experienced negotiators. The second challenge tested cultural adaptation as Mason navigated a complex ceremony honoring war veterans from a species whose concepts of honor and sacrifice differed completely from human understanding. He demonstrated respect while maintaining authenticity, avoiding the cultural violations that could end diplomatic careers. By the fourth challenge, Lucas realized Mason wasn't just meeting council expectations, he was exceeding them, displaying diplomatic instincts that couldn't be taught through preparation alone. The final challenge arrived as the chamber transformed into a crisis scenario. Mason faced an emergency situation where 3 species accused each other of treaty violations while a 4th species threatened military intervention. Time pressure mounted as delays could result in actual galactic conflict. Mason took a deep breath, centered himself the way Lucas had taught him, and began finding connections that none of the council members had anticipated. His solution addressed not just the immediate crisis, but the underlying tensions that had created the situation. When the assessment ended, the chamber fell into profound silence. Council Coordinator Velter's color patterns cycled through sequences Lucas had never seen before as the council members conferred through their private communication networks. Mason Harrison, Veltar finally announced, your performance exceeds council standards in all assessed areas. Mason's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing the 12-year-old boy beneath the diplomatic training. Thank you, Council Coordinator. Furthermore, Veltar continued, your unique approach to several scenarios has provided insights that will be incorporated into council training protocols. Queen Isabella's satisfied expression confirmed Lucas's assessment. The boy had not only succeeded but had demonstrated humanity's potential in ways that would reshape galactic perceptions. Mason Harrison, You are accepted into the Altarian Youth Diplomatic Corps with full honors, Veltar declared. Classes begin in 30 days. The holographic feed terminated as Mason was transported back to the royal chambers. He materialized before Queen Isabella and Lucas with tears streaming down his face and a smile that threatened to split his features. "Your Majesty," he said through his tears, "thank you for believing in me." "No, Mason," Queen Isabella replied gently. "Thank you for proving that human potential has no limits when given proper opportunity." Lucas stepped forward, pride evident in his formal bearing. "Well done, young diplomat." Mason turned to face him with profound gratitude. "Captain, I couldn't have done this without your training." "You possessed the capability," Lucas corrected. "Training simply revealed what was already there." Ambassador Harrison burst through the chamber doors with Patricia Wells close behind, both of them beaming with joy and pride. "Mason, we just received word from the council." "Dad," Mason said, running to embrace his father, "I'm going to diplomatic school." "You're going to change the galaxy," Ambassador Harrison replied, his voice thick with emotion. Queen Isabella watched the family reunion with satisfaction, knowing that this moment represented more than one boy's success. "Captain Kane, your service in this matter reflects exceptional dedication." "It was an honor to serve, Your Majesty." "The honor was mine," she replied, "and Mason's achievement will inspire generations of young humans to reach beyond perceived limitations." As the celebration continued around him, Lucas reflected on the week's events. Protocol and duty had guided his actions, but watching Mason's transformation had reminded him why he served. Sometimes protection meant more than physical security. Sometimes it meant protecting potential itself. The boy who had thrown a datapad in frustration 7 days earlier now stood as living proof that human dignity and capability could overcome any prejudice when given proper opportunity and support. Mason Harrison would attend diplomatic school among the galaxy's most advanced species, carrying humanity's hopes and representing their unlimited potential in chambers where human voices had never been heard before. The rejection had become acceptance, the defeat had become victory, and one 12-year-old boy had opened doors that would benefit all humanity for generations to come.